A fist hammered against a wooden door hard enough to rattle the glass. No answer. It hammered again, harder, 3 sharp blows that sent a wind chime swinging. A dog exploded off the porch, snarling, teeth bared, dragging its body forward on 3 legs. The man on the step froze. Behind him, an engine still ticked from the long drive. Inside the little house, something metal clattered to the floor, and a woman's voice called out, sharp and afraid. That voice belonged to Marlo Finch, and the man at the door had signed her paychecks for 3 years without ever once seeing where she lived. He thought he knew exactly who she was. He was about to learn he had never known her at all. What did Duke Ashford find behind that little door that made him cancel his own wedding in 3 days? Stay with me on this one. Let me back up a few hours because you need to understand the man doing the knocking. Duke Ashford ran the biggest tech company in Charleston. He built it out of a rented garage when he was 24, and by the time he was 40, he had 1,100 people on payroll and a glass tower downtown with his name across the top. People said he was hard. People said he never smiled in a meeting. Both of those things were true. But nobody ever said he was cruel, and nobody ever said he was late. Duke Ashford was a man who kept his word to the minute. He returned every call the same day. He read every contract himself. He fired 2 vice presidents in 1 year for lying to him, not for losing money, just for lying. That was the kind of man he was, precise, cold at the edges, and in his own mind fair. And in 3 days he was getting married. Her name was Vivienne Caldwell. Old Charleston money, the kind that came with a last name people whispered at the club. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, all polish and edges, and she had spent 18 months planning a wedding that would put 400 people in a garden by the harbor. Duke had said yes to all of it. The band. The flowers flown in from somewhere. The guest list he barely recognized. He was a practical man, and Vivienne was the practical choice. That's what he told himself. She fit the life he'd built. She knew which fork to use. She knew which senator to seat next to which developer. When he pictured the next 30 years, he pictured a woman like that beside him, and he decided that was the same thing as love. Now here's the thing about Duke's life. It ran on one person, and it wasn't Vivienne. It was his assistant, Marlo Finch. 3 years she'd sat outside his office. A soft-spoken woman, heavy-set, always in the same handful of plain cardigans. She was 36 and she moved slower than the young ones, and Duke had noticed that. He'd noticed it the way you notice a clock that's a little off. She was never at her desk before 8:15 when everyone else was in by 8. She turned down every after-hours meeting. She'd leave at 5 sharp no matter what was burning, and she never once explained why. And yet the work was flawless. The travel never went wrong. The contracts always came back clean. She remembered the names of clients' children. She caught a $2 million error in a vendor agreement that 3 lawyers had missed. She was, if he was honest, the most reliable person in the building. He was not, at that point in his life, honest. Duke had built a whole story about her in his head. Disorganized, he decided. A woman who couldn't quite keep it together. He kept her because she was good, sharp, careful, never dropped a detail, but he kept her the way you keep a car with a rattle in the engine. Useful, frustrating, a little bit beneath him. Vivienne put it more plainly. At the last 3 galas, she'd looked Marlo up and down and said things she thought were funny. "Duke, does the company not offer a gym membership?" Once, in front of a table of donors, she'd laughed and said, "She's sweet, but honestly, who lets themselves go like that?" Duke hadn't laughed. But and this is the part that mattered, he hadn't stopped her either. He just looked at his plate and let it slide, the way he let everything about Marlo slide. He told himself it wasn't his business. He told himself a lot of things that were really just easier than looking. That was the man. Now here's the morning. There was a merger closing Monday. $100 million deal, and it needed Marlowe's signature on a witness page and a stack of contracts back in the office by end of day. She'd called in that morning, voice tight, saying she couldn't come to the tower, something at home. Duke had drummed his fingers on the desk and thought, of course, 3 days before I need her most, she disappears. He'd waited 20 minutes for her to call back and explain herself. She hadn't, and that silence, more than anything, was what put him in the car. So he did something he had never done in 3 years. He got in his car, put the contracts on the passenger seat, slid the cream-colored wedding invitation into his coat pocket because he meant to drop it at the printer on the way back, and he drove out to her address himself. Not to be kind, to be efficient, to get his signature and get out. He drove until the tower shrank behind him and the streets got narrow and the pavement went a gravel. Down by the water where the houses leaned and the paint peeled, where the harbor smelled like salt and low tide. He passed children on bikes and old men on porches who watched his black car the way you watch a storm cloud. He stopped in front of a cottage the size of his kitchen and thought, she lives here. On what I pay her, he'd assumed a tidy condo. A townhouse maybe. Not this. And then a 3-legged dog came off the porch like a shot, and he was standing at that door, pounding, hearing something crash inside. The door opened. Marlowe stood there in an apron, flower or something on her sleeve, her hair coming loose, and her face went white when she saw him. Not embarrassed white. Afraid white. Behind her the little house was warm and full of the smell of chicken and broth, and from somewhere in the back a man's voice, thin and old, called out, "Marlowe, who is it, sweetheart?" "Mr. Ashford," she said. She was blocking the doorway with her whole body. You shouldn't have come here, please. This isn't a good time." Duke did not do well with being told no. He was already halfway to annoyed. "I have contracts," he said, holding up the folder. "You didn't come in. The merger closes Monday. I need your signature and I need to understand what's so important that you—" He stopped, because over her shoulder through the doorway he saw it, a hospital bed, right there in the front room of a cottage that had no business holding a hospital bed, and in it, propped on pillows, an old man. Skin like paper, one leg gone below the knee, the blanket flat where it should have been. A bowl of soup steaming on the tray across his lap and a spoon, and Marlowe's chair pulled up close beside him, still warm. The dog pushed past her legs and stood between Duke and the old man and growled low. "Biscuit," the old man said softly. "Easy, boy, easy." The dog sat. Nobody spoke for a second. Duke Ashford, who always knew what to say, stood in that doorway and did not know what to say. "His name is Sergeant Ray Holloway," Marlowe said finally. Her voice had gone quiet and steady, the fight drained out of it. "He served with my brother, overseas. He was my brother's sergeant. He carried Danny 2 miles under fire the day Danny died, and he lost that leg doing it." She swallowed. "He doesn't have anybody left, so he has me." Duke looked at the old man. The old man looked back at him with pale, watery eyes and lifted one shaking hand off the blanket, an old habit, trying to be polite for company. "You'll have to forgive the mess," Ray said. "I don't get up like I used to." And that was the moment the story Duke had told himself for 3 years just fell apart in his hands. He came inside. He didn't ask, he just did, and Marlowe stepped back and let him. He stood in that tiny front room in his $4,000 suit with a $100 million folder under his arm, and he watched his assistant, the disorganized one, the one who couldn't keep it together, pick the spoon back up, blow gently on the soup, and hold it steady to an old soldier's mouth like she'd done it 1,000 times. Because she had. "How long?" Duke said. His voice came out rough. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since Danny died," Marlowe said, not looking up. "4 years. Ray came home with nowhere to go and a stack of bills the VA kept losing. I couldn't leave him in it. She wiped the old man's chin with a cloth. The morning nurse comes at 7. She has to leave by 8:15. That's why I'm never in before then, Mr. Ashford. Somebody has to be here until she comes and after she goes. She said it flat, no self-pity in it. The pharmacy closes at 5. That's why I leave at 5. And I turn down the dinners because there's nobody to sit with him if I don't come straight home. That's all it ever was. Not disorganization. Arithmetic. 3 years of little rattles in the engine. And every single one of them had an answer, and the answer was this room. Every late arrival. Every early exit. Every meeting she'd quietly declined. He'd read all of it as weakness. It had been the opposite of weakness the whole time. Duke set the folder down on a side table. He couldn't have said why. He walked to the window and looked out at the peeling houses along the water, and he felt something he didn't have a word for pressing on his chest. There was a knock, the screen door. A neighbor, a big woman with gray braids and a casserole dish in her hands, leaned in without waiting to be asked. "Marlo, honey, I brought Ray his supper for tomorrow so you don't owe." She saw the suit. She saw the stranger. Her face closed up like a fist, protective. "Who's this?" "My boss," Marlo said. "It's all right, Miss Odessa." Miss Odessa did not think it was all right. She set the dish down and folded her arms and looked Duke Ashford up and down the way you'd size up a man who'd come to collect a debt. And then, because she was the kind of woman who says what she thinks, she said it. "You know what this girl does," Miss Odessa said. "You know she buys my heart pills when my check don't stretch. You know she bought the Delacroix boys inhaler last winter and drove Mr. Prout to dialysis 3 times a week till he passed. On what she makes." She jabbed a finger at Marlo, but her eyes stayed on Duke. Half this block would have lost the house, or lost the medicine, or lost their minds if it wasn't for her, and she never once asked for a thing back. "So whoever you are, mister, you'd best be here to help, because we look after our own down here." Marlo had gone red. "Miss Odessa, please." But Duke was already doing the arithmetic. He knew to the dollar what he paid Marlo Finch. It was a good salary. It was not a salary that bought heart pills for a whole block and medicine for an old soldier and groceries for people who couldn't drive to the store, which meant she was giving away nearly everything she had, and coming to work every day in the same 3 cardigans, and taking Vivienne Caldwell's insults across a dinner table with her hands folded in her lap, and never saying one word to defend herself. He thought about the raise she'd never asked for. The bonus he'd handed out one Christmas that she'd tried to return. He'd read that as strange, too. It had never once occurred to him to wonder where the money went. Duke Ashford sat down. Right there, in the plain wooden chair by the door, in the little house that smelled like broth. He sat down because his legs told him to. Miss Odessa poured him coffee whether he wanted it or not. That was just how she was, and for a while nobody made him talk. The old man dozed. The dog put its heavy head on Duke's shoe and sighed. Marlo cleared the soup bowl and moved around the little kitchen, quiet and easy, and the panic that had been on her face when she opened the door slowly went away, because he wasn't shouting, he wasn't firing her, he was just sitting there. And Duke felt it settle over him, a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. Simple, warm, honest. He thought, so this is what I've been missing. He thought, maybe I finally understand her and that's enough, and now I'll drive back to my life. He'd learned something. He was a better man for it. He'd give her a raise Monday and let her keep her secret and go on to his wedding a little wiser. That's what he thought, sitting in that quiet kitchen with the coffee going warm in his hands. He thought the hard part was over. He was wrong. The screen door opened again, and this time it didn't knock. A young man in a pressed shirt stepped in, clipboard in his hand and a lanyard around his neck, and he didn't even look at the old man in the bed. He looked at his paperwork. "Finch Residence," he said. "I've got a notice for the property, all of them actually, the whole Harbor Row." He peeled a yellow sheet off his clipboard and held it out. 60 days. You'll want to read it carefully. Marlo took the yellow paper. Duke watched the color drain out of her face for the second time that day. And this time, it wasn't about being seen. "What is it?" Duke asked, standing. She couldn't answer, so he took it out of her hands and read it himself. And at the top of the page, above the words "Notice of Eviction and Relocation and Demolition," was a company logo he knew better than his own face. Because it was his own face. It was his company, Ashford Group, the real estate arm he'd spun off 2 years ago and barely thought about since, run by a board he trusted to make money without bothering him. The whole Harbor Row, every peeling, leaning, casserole-carrying house of it was being bought, cleared, and knocked flat. And the buyer was him. Now the story changed. Because up to that yellow sheet, this had been a story about one man learning his assistant had a good heart. That's a nice story. But now the man's own name was on the paper that was going to put an old soldier's hospital bed out on the curb, and the woman who nursed half the block into staying alive was about to lose the roof she did it under. This wasn't about understanding anymore. This was about what Duke Ashford was going to do with the power that had accidentally become a weapon. "Who authorized this?" Duke said, very quietly. The young man finally looked up, saw the suit, saw the face, and went pale himself because he recognized it too. "Sir, this is the Harbor Point project. It's been in development for. The acquisition partner pushed it through. The Caldwell Group is co-financing." "The Caldwell Group," Duke repeated. "Vivienne's family, her father's firm, the old Charleston money." And right then it landed, all of it, the whole shape of the thing. His fiancée's family had gone into business with his own real estate board to level the harbor for a luxury resort, and Vivienne had known. Vivienne had absolutely known. She'd sat across from Marlo Finch at 3 galas and mocked her body while quietly signing off on the paperwork that would tear the ground out from under the very people Marlo was killing herself to protect. Marlo just hadn't known whose money it was, but Marlo knew now. She was staring at the logo. She was staring at Duke. "It's you," she whispered. "It's your company." "This whole time." "I didn't know," Duke said, and even as he said it he heard how weak it sounded. "Marlo, I swear to you I didn't know. I don't run that division day to day." He stopped. Because it didn't matter. That was the point. He hadn't known his own assistant lived here, hadn't known his own company was crushing this street, hadn't known any of it because he'd spent 3 years not looking. His not knowing was the whole problem. His not knowing was a luxury paid for by everyone in this room. A man could sign the checks and keep his hands clean, he realized, only because somebody else was carrying the weight of what those checks actually did. The old man had woken up. He was looking at the yellow paper in Duke's hand with the calm, tired eyes of a man who has already lost more than a house. "Is it my time to go then?" Ray said gently. "It's all right, son. I've been evicted from harder places than this." That broke something loose in Duke's chest. "Look, before I finish this, if you've made it this far and your heart's in it too, do me one favor and hit that subscribe button. This is the kind of story that only gets told if people like you stick around for the whole thing. All right. Where were we? Yes. That yellow paper and the old soldier saying it's all right." "No," Duke said. "It is not your time to go. Nobody's going anywhere." He took out his phone. Marlo put a hand on his arm. She still, even now, was trying to protect somebody, and this time it was him from doing something rash. "Mr. Ashford, you have a wedding in 3 days. The Caldwells. This is her family's deal, if you cross them." "Marlo," Duke said. He looked at her for what felt like the first time in 3 years. Really looked. "You have taken every insult that woman ever threw at you and folded your hands and said nothing. Why?" Marlo's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Because it wasn't worth the fight," she said. Because I had bigger things to spend myself on than what Vivienne Caldwell thinks of my dress size. She glanced at the old man, at the neighbor, at the dog. This is what I've got. It's not much, but it's real. I wasn't going to trade my dignity in an argument I couldn't win. Duke made his call. He called the head of the real estate board first, and he did not raise his voice, which anyone who worked for him will tell you is far more frightening than shouting. "The Harbor Point acquisition," he said. "Every notice on that row is rescinded before end of business today. Everyone. If a single family gets moved, you and I are done, and I mean done in a way your lawyers will study for years. Are we clear?" A pause. On the other end, a man started to explain about signed agreements and sunk costs and the partners. Duke listened to about 10 seconds of it. "I didn't ask what it would cost," he said. "I told you what to do, then get clear." He hung up. He made a second call to his own attorney. "I want the Ashford Group's stake in Harbor Point pulled out of the Caldwell partnership. Today, I don't care about the penalty. I want the Harbor Row put into a land trust protected in the names of the families who live there. Yes, a gift. Start the paperwork now. And I want it built so no future board of mine can ever undo it." Marlowe was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Miss Odessa had one hand over her mouth. Even the young man with the clipboard had frozen, clipboard forgotten at his side. And then Duke made the third call, the one he'd been walking toward all afternoon without knowing it. Vivienne answered on the second ring, bright and busy. "Duke, darling, the florist is having a meltdown about the peonies. Can you please tell her?" "Did you know," Duke said, "that the Harbor Point land your father is clearing is where my assistant lives, where she's kept an old soldier alive for 4 years? Did you know that when you were calling her fat across the dinner table, she was buying medicine for the same people your resort is about to bulldoze?" Silence on the line, the kind of silence that is an answer. "You knew," Duke said. "Duke, it's just a piece of property," Vivienne said, and her voice had turned cool and reasonable, and that was the worst part, how reasonable she sounded. "Those people were going to be relocated. Compensated. Honestly, you're being sentimental about a slum, and about her of all people." "She's the help, Duke." Duke reached into his coat pocket. His fingers found the cream-colored wedding invitation he'd meant to drop at the printer, the one with both their names in gold. He pulled it out. He looked at it. "She's the help," he repeated softly. "Vivienne, that woman has more heart in the hand she uses to hold a spoon than you have in your whole body. I've spent 3 years standing next to the wrong person and calling it the right choice." He was already tearing it, the invitation, cleanly down the middle, right through the gold. "The wedding's off. All of it. Tell your father the partnership's off too. I'll have my lawyer send everything in writing so there's no confusion." He didn't wait for her to scream. He just ended the call and set the 2 halves of the invitation on the side table next to the untouched contracts folder. The room was dead silent. Even the dog was watching him. "Mr. Ashford," Marlowe finally managed, "you can't. You just canceled your wedding for a street of people you met an hour ago." "No," Duke said, and his voice had gone quiet and certain. "I canceled it for one person I've known for 3 years and never once bothered to see. The street's just where I found her." He walked to the hospital bed. He got down on one knee beside it, this hard man who never smiled in meetings, and he took the old soldier's paper-thin hand in both of his. "Sergeant Holloway," he said, "you carried a man 2 miles under fire and it cost you a leg. I run a company with 1,100 people in it, and I couldn't be bothered to walk across my own lobby and learn who was holding my life together." His voice caught. "Nobody is putting you out. This is your home for as long as you want it, and the deed's going to say so. You have my word, and I keep my word." Ray Holloway looked at him for a long moment with those pale, tired eyes. Then he squeezed Duke's hand back, weak as a child's grip, and he smiled. "Danny always said his sister worked for a good man," the old soldier said. "Took you a while to prove him right, son. But you got there." Marlowe made a sound then, half a sob, and pressed her hand to her mouth, and Miss Odessa gathered her in both big arms, and the three-legged dog got up and turned in a circle and barked once, sharp and glad, like even he understood the wind had changed. The block was saved before the sun went down. It took lawyers a few weeks to make it real on paper, but the notices came off the doors that very evening. Ashford Group pulled its money out of Harbor Point, and without Duke's stake the resort deal collapsed, and the Caldwells took a loss that stung their pride worse than their bank accounts. The Harbor Row went into a land trust, every deed protected, every family named, and a small fund set aside for repairs and taxes so no yellow paper would ever land on those porches again. Duke signed it all himself. He didn't hand it to a board. He'd learned what handing things to a board could cost. Vivienne sent one furious letter and then nothing. The 400 guests got a short note saying the wedding would not take place. Charleston talked for a month, the way Charleston does. Duke let them talk. He found he didn't care what the club whispered anymore. Somewhere in that little kitchen by the water, the part of him that lived for the club had quietly died, and he did not miss it. He came back to the Harbor Row. That's the part people don't expect. He didn't fix it all with a checkbook and drive away feeling clean. He came back, the next Saturday and the one after that. He learned to change the dressing on Ray's leg. He learned that Miss Odessa's coffee could strip paint and that you drank it anyway and said thank you. He learned the Delacroix boy's name and Mr. Prout's dialysis schedule for the neighbors who came after him, and how to get the three-legged dog to stop growling, which, it turned out, only took time and a pocket of bacon. He gave Marlowe a raise she tried 3 times to refuse. He also gave her something she couldn't refuse, which was help, a real nurse for the daytime hours, a standing grocery account for the block, a proper wheelchair ramp built onto the cottage so Ray could sit on the porch in the sun. But he was careful, and this matters, he was careful never to take the caretaking away from her, because he understood by then that the giving wasn't a burden she'd been carrying. It was who she was. It was the best thing in her, and you don't fix the best thing in a person. You just stop making them carry it alone. One evening near the end of that summer, Ray Holloway passed in his sleep. Peacefully, in his own bed, in his own home, with the window open to the harbor he loved, and the dog on the floor beside him and Marlowe in the chair she'd pulled up 10,000 times. He'd told her the week before that he was tired and ready and not afraid. He left her his dog tags and his Purple Heart in a cigar box, and he left instructions that Duke Ashford be given his old field compass, so the boy doesn't get lost again. Duke kept that compass on his desk in the glass tower, right next to the family photos where the deal trophies used to sit. At the small service by the water, the whole block came. Miss Odessa sang. Marlowe stood at the front in a plain dress, dignified and steady, and when it was over, Duke walked her back down the gravel road to the cottage in the low evening light. The wind chime was turning on the porch. The dog, gray around the muzzle now, thumped its tail against the boards. They stood at the door where it had all started, where he'd once pounded his fist and demanded a signature. "You know," Duke said, "the day I drove out here I was angry at you. I stood on this step thinking you'd let me down." He shook his head slowly. "I had it exactly backwards. You'd been holding up half the world with both hands, and I'd been too busy to notice you had any hands at all." Marlowe smiled, tired and gentle. "You noticed eventually." "I'd like to keep noticing," Duke said. "If you'll let me, not as your boss, not out here on the porch anymore, standing on the wrong side of the door." He paused, and the hard man's voice went soft as anything. "I'd like to be let in, Marlowe, for good." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she reached past him and pushed the door open, the same door she'd once blocked with her whole body, and she stood aside, and she let him in. The three-legged dog got up and followed them both inside, and the wind chime kept turning in the salt air, and the little house that had never held anything but love held a little more of it now. Funny thing about that first knock. It sounded like an ending, a man pounding on a door to collect what he was owed. Turned out it was the beginning. Turned out the thing Duke Ashford was owed wasn't a signature at all. It was the truth about who'd been sitting outside his office for 3 years, quietly saving lives on a salary he'd called too high. He almost married the wrong woman in a garden full of strangers. Instead, he found the right one in a kitchen that smelled like soup, feeding an old soldier, guarded by a dog with 3 legs and a heart with room for everyone. And that, believe me, is a far better place to end up.